A mountain man saw a woman living alone in an old cabin. What he did that day will amaze you. Ethan had always felt a deep connection with the mountains. Ever since he was a boy, the tall pines, the crisp air, and the quiet streams had drawn him in. Life in the city never suited him. The constant noise, the crowded streets, and the endless rush of people made him anxious. So, when he had the chance to move to a small, secluded cabin deep in the northern mountains, he took it without hesitation. He traded a life of deadlines and traffic for one of trees, wildlife, and the simple rhythm of the seasons. His cabin was modest but comfortable. Built from sturdy logs and surrounded by towering pines, it was perched on a gentle slope near a clear, bubbling stream. Every morning Ethan would wake to the sound of birds singing and water flowing over smooth stones. The sun would filter through the trees, casting golden light on the cabin's wooden walls. It was a life that required work, of course. He chopped firewood, tended a small vegetable patch, hunted occasionally, and made sure his cabin stayed warm and dry. But despite the hard work, Ethan loved it. The mountains gave him peace in a way that nothing else ever could. Even though he lived alone, Ethan did not feel lonely most of the time. He enjoyed the silence, the way he could hear the wind rustling through the trees or the distant call of an eagle. Yet there were moments when he longed for someone to talk to, someone who could share the small joys and struggles of life with him. But he had learned to be patient and to let life unfold as it would. One crisp morning in early autumn, Ethan decided to take a longer walk along a trail that ran near the stream behind his cabin. The leaves were just starting to turn golden and red, creating a stunning mosaic of color. The air was cool but refreshing, and the smell of pine mixed with damp earth made him feel alive. As he walked, he noticed how the light shifted through the trees, how a bird landed on a branch for just a moment before flying away, and how the stream seemed to sparkle under the rising sun. He walked farther than usual, enjoying the quiet and the solitude. That's when he noticed something unusual. Smoke was rising in the distance, curling gently into the sky. Ethan stopped in his tracks. Smoke in the mountains was not rare. It could come from a distant cabin or a controlled campfire. But this smoke seemed closer, and it was coming from a place where he had never noticed a cabin before. Curiosity stirred within him, and he decided to investigate. But he followed the trail, careful not to make too much noise. The forest was dense, with fallen leaves covering the ground and branches brushing against his shoulders. After a short walk, he reached a small clearing. There, nestled among the trees, was an old cabin. Its logs were weathered, and moss had begun to grow on the roof. It looked like it had stood there for decades, almost forgotten by the world. The smoke rose gently from its chimney, and for a moment, Ethan simply admired the sight. It was peaceful and charming in a way that made him feel nostalgic. Then he noticed movement inside. A woman was chopping firewood, her movements steady but careful. She had dark hair pulled back and wore simple, worn clothing that suggested she had been living in the cabin for some time. Ethan could see the lines of concentration on her face as she worked, the way her hands gripped the axe, and the care with which she handled each piece of wood. Something about her presence made Ethan pause. She was alone, just like him, surviving in the wilderness, but in a way he had never known. Ethan stepped back into the trees, unsure if he should approach or simply leave. He felt a strange mixture of curiosity and respect. He did not want to intrude, but he also felt a desire to help if she needed it. The woman seemed self-sufficient, but living alone in the mountains was not easy. Food, firewood, and warmth were constant challenges, especially as winter approached. He wondered if she had enough supplies, if she had someone to rely on if something went wrong. For a while, Ethan simply watched from a distance. He noticed the small details of her life. A stack of firewood leaned against the cabin, some of it split, some still in logs. A small garden patch grew nearby, with late-season vegetables that had survived the early frost. A few clothes hung on a line, swaying gently in the breeze. It was a simple life, one that required constant work and attention. But it was also a life that reflected determination, resilience, and independence. Ethan felt a connection to her, even without speaking a word. He knew what it was like to live alone in the mountains, to rely on oneself for survival, and to find comfort in small accomplishments. Breaths. He also knew the loneliness that could creep in during long, quiet nights, when the only sounds were the wind and the distant calls of animals. Seeing her there, working quietly, reminded him of his own struggles and triumphs. As the sun climbed higher, Ethan realized he had been standing there for nearly an hour. The woman paused, looking toward the forest as if sensing someone's presence. Perhaps. He ducked behind a tree, careful not to be seen. He did not want to startle her or make her feel unsafe. He decided that he would leave for now, but the image of the cabin and the woman stayed in his mind. Something about the scene had left an impression, a feeling that he could not easily shake. Walking back along the trail, Ethan thought about the woman and her life in the mountains. He wondered what had brought her here, why she chose solitude, and how long she had been living in that cabin. He also felt a quiet resolve forming inside him. He wanted to help, not in a way that would intrude on her privacy, but in a way that could make her life a little easier and safer. It was a small desire, a flicker of kindness, but it felt important. By the time he reached his own cabin, Ethan had made a decision. Tomorrow he would gather some supplies, extra blankets, firewood, and food, and bring them to the woman. He would introduce himself carefully, respecting her space and her choice to live alone. He did not know how she would react, but he felt certain that offering help was the right thing to do. The mountains could be beautiful, but they could also be unforgiving. No one should have to face them completely alone if they didn't want to. That evening, as he sat by his own fireplace, Ethan thought about the woman in the cabin hidden in the trees. He imagined her chopping firewood, tending her small garden, and sitting quietly by the window as the sun set. Narration. He wondered about her story, about the events that had led her to seek solitude in the mountains, and he felt the quiet excitement, a sense that meeting her and offering help could mark the beginning of something meaningful, not just for her, but for himself as well. The mountains outside were dark and still, the stars bright against the deep blue sky. Ethan could hear the faint rustle of leaves and the gentle flow of the stream. In that moment he felt a deep sense of purpose. Life in the mountains was often quiet and lonely, but it was also full of opportunities to connect, to care, and to make a difference in someone else's life. And tomorrow he would take that first step, walking through the forest to the hidden cabin and offering kindness to a stranger who shared the same love for the wilderness that he did. Ethan went to bed that night with a sense of anticipation. The mountains had always been his home, but now they held the possibility of something more, a new friendship, a shared understanding, and the quiet joy of helping someone who truly needed it. He closed his eyes, listening to the wind through the trees, and knew that tomorrow would be a day that neither he nor the woman in the cabin would ever forget. The next morning Ethan woke early, the crisp mountain air filling his lungs. He could still feel the quiet anticipation from the previous day, the image of the small cabin and the woman who lived there still vivid in his mind. He had thought about her all night, wondering how long she had been living alone, how she managed the harshness of the mountains, and whether she had someone who could help in times of need. A small sense of responsibility grew inside him. Even though he didn't know her, he felt he had to do something. After a simple breakfast of oatmeal and fresh bread he had baked the day before, Ethan dressed warmly and stepped outside. The frost still clung to the grass, sparkling in the morning light, and the mountains around him glowed with soft shades of gold and green. He walked toward the storage shed near his cabin and began gathering supplies. He selected a few thick blankets he had sewn himself, some extra firewood that he had split and stacked neatly, and a small basket of preserved fruits and vegetables. He also packed a few simple items like canned beans, rice, and dried meat, staples that could last a long time in a small cabin. As he worked, Ethan thought about how he would approach the woman. He didn't want to startle her or make her feel uncomfortable. Some people valued their privacy above everything, especially those who lived in isolation by choice. He knew that offering help too forcefully could make her distrustful. He wanted to be gentle, patient, and kind. With everything packed carefully into a small sled, he set out toward the cabin hidden among the trees, pulling the supplies behind him. The trail was quiet, and the only sounds were the soft crunch of frost under his boots and the occasional call of a distant bird. As he walked, he remembered his own early days in the mountains. He had arrived with nothing but a small backpack, a few tools, and determination. He had struggled just as anyone would, learning how to live with the rhythm of nature, to anticipate storms, and to survive long, cold nights. He understood that life alone in the wilderness was not easy, and he respected the courage it took to choose such a life. When he reached the clearing, he saw the cabin again, just as he had yesterday. The smoke rose steadily from the chimney, and he could hear the rhythmic sound of chopping wood. The woman was outside, splitting logs with careful precision. Ethan paused behind a tree, watching for a moment. Breath. She seemed unaware of him, focused entirely on her work. Her movements were smooth and confident, yet there was a hint of fatigue in her posture. Even though she appeared strong and capable, Ethan could sense the subtle signs of exhaustion. The slight slump in her shoulders, the way she wiped her brow frequently, the careful pacing of her movements. Taking a deep breath, Ethan stepped forward slowly and called out in a calm, friendly voice. "Good morning! My name is Ethan. I live nearby." She hesitated for a moment, gripping the axe tightly, unsure whether to approach him or retreat inside. "Hello," she said cautiously. "I'm Clara." Ethan smiled gently, trying to convey that he meant no harm. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. "Psst. I noticed your cabin yesterday and wanted to bring some supplies. Winter is coming, and I thought you might find them useful." Clara's eyes softened slightly and she lowered the axe. There was a pause, a moment where trust had to be considered carefully. Then, with a small nod, she said, "That's very kind of you. Thank you." Ethan placed the sled on the ground and began unpacking the supplies. He offered the blankets first. "I made these myself," he said. "They're warm, and I thought you could use them when the nights get colder." Clara accepted them gratefully, feeling the thick softness of the fabric. Breath. Then he handed her the food supplies, explaining gently how they could last for weeks if stored properly. She looked at each item carefully, nodding as she checked them.
"I didn't realize someone lived nearby," Clara admitted after a moment.
"I thought I was completely alone out here." "You're not entirely alone," Ethan replied softly.
"I live just over the ridge. I usually keep to myself, but I wanted to make sure you have what you need."
Clara smiled faintly, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly.
It was clear she was not used to receiving help from anyone. She had survived on her own for months, relying on her skills and determination. Accepting assistance felt strange, but also comforting. She realized that accepting kindness did not mean weakness. It meant acknowledging the humanity that connected everyone, even in the most isolated places. Once the supplies were inside the cabin, Ethan asked if she needed help with anything else. Clara hesitated, then mentioned the broken window in the kitchen. Psst, 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 psst. A strong wind had cracked the glass during a storm, making it difficult to keep the cabin warm. Ethan nodded. "I can fix that for you," he said. "It shouldn't take long." While he repaired the window, Clara moved quietly around the cabin, tidying her small space and preparing hot water for tea. The cabin was simple but cozy. A few wooden chairs, a small table, and a bookshelf filled with old books gave the room character. A small rug lay in front of the fireplace, and a few potted plants on the windowsill brought a touch of life inside. Clara had made it clear that she had taken care to make the cabin a home, even in solitude. Breath. Ethan finished fixing the window, making sure the glass was secure and the frame tight. "That should keep the cold wind out," he said, stepping back to admire the work. Clara thanked him sincerely, her gratitude genuine and heartfelt. As the day went on, they shared tea by the fireplace. Bray. Ethan told stories of life in the mountains, how he had built his cabin and the challenges he had faced when he first arrived. Clara listened intently, occasionally sharing small details about her own experiences. She spoke of learning to hunt for food, the long days spent chopping wood, and the quiet nights under the stars. Their conversation was simple yet meaningful. It was the beginning of a connection built on understanding, respect, and shared experience. Ethan noticed that Clara was cautious, yet her eyes held a spark of curiosity. She was not used to strangers, especially not ones offering help without expecting anything in return. He admired her strength and resilience, and he wanted to make sure she knew that she could trust him. Narration. He decided to visit occasionally, always offering support but never pressing beyond what she was comfortable with. By the time the sun began to dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the cabin, Ethan realized it was time to return home. He gathered his tools and prepared to leave. "I'll check in again soon," he said, smiling. "Only if you want me to." Clara nodded. "I'd like that," she said quietly. "Thank you again, Ethan. Today made a difference." Walking back through the forest, Ethan felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the physical exertion. Helping someone, connecting with another person, and seeing the relief on her face had filled him with a quiet satisfaction. He thought about the challenges she must face alone and the courage it took to live in the mountains without support. He also felt a sense of hope, a belief that small acts of kindness could grow into something meaningful over time. That evening, as he sat by his own fireplace, Ethan reflected on the day's events. He realized that helping Clara had brought him a new perspective. Life in the mountains was not just about survival. It was also about community, trust, and the small ways people could care for one another. Even in solitude, there was room for friendship, for connection, and for moments of shared humanity. He thought about the coming winter and how difficult it could be for someone living alone. He made a mental note to bring extra supplies, check on the cabin more frequently, and continue to build trust slowly. He did not want to impose, but he wanted Clara to know she was not entirely alone, drowned in despair. Sometimes even a small gesture, a blanket, a repaired window, a shared conversation, could make all the difference.
As night fell, the mountains grew quiet.
The stars shone brightly, and the forest seemed alive with gentle sounds of nature. Ethan knew that Clara's cabin was safe for the night, warm and stocked with the essentials she needed. But more importantly, he knew that a connection had been made, a quiet, unspoken understanding between two people who shared the same love for the wilderness and the same respect for its challenges. He went to bed that night with a sense of contentment, knowing that tomorrow would bring more work, more quiet walks, and perhaps more moments of connection. The mountains had given him solitude for many years, but now they had given him something new. The opportunity to make a real difference in someone else's life. One small act of kindness at a time. Ethan felt a deep sense of purpose, a quiet joy that carried him through the night, ready for the days to come.
The next morning, Ethan woke before dawn, as was his habit.
The cold mountain air seeped through the small cracks in his cabin, and he pulled his blanket closer. But today, His thoughts were already with Clara. He wondered how she had slept, whether her cabin had stayed warm through the night, and if she was ready for the day ahead. The thought of her alone in the mountains tugged at him in a way he hadn't expected. He had come to admire her quiet strength, her self-reliance, and the way she carried herself with dignity despite the hardships she faced. After a quick breakfast, Ethan gathered more supplies. He had decided to bring tools this time, a small set of hammers, nails, and a coil of rope, thinking there might be other small repairs she needed. He also packed extra blankets and a few jars of preserved fruits, knowing that winter would soon arrive and food might become scarce. He carefully loaded everything onto his sled, making sure it was balanced and easy to pull along the snow-dusted trail. As he walked toward Clara's cabin, Ethan felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He wanted to be helpful, but he also wanted to respect her space. He knew that trust could not be rushed, and that even the smallest act of intrusion could make someone retreat. He reminded himself to be patient, gentle, and observant. When he arrived at the clearing, he noticed that Clara was already outside tending her small garden. Even though it was late autumn, she had been working to prepare the soil for the coming winter, covering vegetables with straw and checking for any remaining ripe produce. She looked up as he approached, her eyes brightening slightly. "Good morning, Ethan," she said. "I didn't expect you so early. I wanted to make sure you had everything you might need today," Ethan replied with a smile. "I brought some tools in case there's anything that needs fixing, and a few extra blankets for the cold nights." Clara hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "That would be very helpful. Thank you." Together, they moved inside the cabin. Ethan set down the tools and began inspecting the structure. He noticed a few loose boards on the floor and a leaky section near the roof where rain had begun to seep in. While he worked, Clara handed him small items and watched attentively. But she was curious, asking occasional questions about how to handle certain repairs. As Ethan hammered nails and secured the boards, Clara began to open up about her life. She spoke softly, almost as if she were afraid of being judged. "I didn't always live in the mountains," she said. Breath. "Life in the city became too much. I needed to be alone to find peace and space to think." Ethan nodded, listening carefully.
I understand, he said. Sometimes solitude can help you find clarity, and the mountains are good at giving that.
But even here, it's okay to accept help when you need it. "I've learned that the hard way," she admitted. "I didn't want to rely on anyone, but sometimes it's necessary." As the hours passed, they worked side by side. Ethan repaired the leaky roof, reinforced the floorboards, and secured the windows against the cold wind. Clara fetched materials, held tools, and sometimes simply watched, learning from his experience. It was clear that she valued independence, but she also recognized the benefit of having someone with knowledge and skill to help when needed.
By midday, they paused for a simple meal of bread, cheese, and warm tea.
Breaths. They sat on the small rug in front of the fireplace, enjoying the warmth and the quiet. The fire crackled softly, filling the cabin with light and comfort. For a moment, the mountains outside seemed distant, as if the world had shrunk to this small space where two people shared food, conversation, and companionship. During their break, Ethan asked Clara about her skills in the wilderness. She spoke of hunting, gathering, and gardening, of learning to read the signs of weather, and of understanding the patterns of the forest. Ethan listened with admiration, realizing that Clara was not only brave, but remarkably capable. Living alone in the mountains required courage, resilience, and resourcefulness, qualities she clearly possessed. "I have to admit," Ethan said after a while, "I didn't expect to meet anyone like you out here." "Most people wouldn't choose this life." Clara laughed softly. "I didn't choose it lightly. It took time to find the courage to leave everything behind. But I needed space to heal, to figure out what mattered to me. Narration. Their conversation drifted naturally from one topic to another. They spoke of the changing seasons, the wildlife they had seen, and the beauty of the mountains at different times of day. Round. They shared small stories from their past, without delving too deeply into pain or hardship, simply connecting through common experiences and a shared respect for nature. As the afternoon approached, Ethan suggested taking a walk along the stream near her cabin. "It might help to stretch our legs after all the work," he said. Clara agreed, curious about what he wanted to show her. They walked slowly, the soft crunch of leaves and the gentle rush of water accompanying them. Ethan pointed out areas where the forest had changed, where new plants were growing, and where certain animals might hide. He shared small tips and observations, teaching without seeming to teach. And Clara listened attentively. At one point, they came across a fallen tree that blocked the trail. Ethan knelt to inspect it, and together they figured out a way to move smaller branches and clear a path. Clara laughed at the effort, her earlier tension melting away in the simplicity of the task. "I haven't done anything like this in a while," she admitted. "It's good to work together."
By the time they returned to the cabin, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the clearing.
Ethan helped Clara carry firewood inside and arrange it neatly by the fireplace. They worked in comfortable silence, each appreciating the quiet rhythm of tasks done together. It was not loud or dramatic, but there was a sense of trust forming, a connection that went beyond words. As evening fell, they sat again by the fire, sipping tea and listening to the wind rustle through the trees. Ethan noticed a change in Clara. She seemed more relaxed, her eyes lighter, and her smile more genuine. The tension from the past months, the isolation, and the worry about surviving alone had begun to ease. He felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that his simple acts of help, bringing supplies, repairing the cabin, sharing knowledge, had made a real difference. Clara, in turn, felt a sense of comfort she hadn't experienced in a long time. She realized that accepting help did not make her weak, nor did it diminish her independence. Instead, it created a bond of trust, a shared understanding between two people who respected each other's strengths and boundaries. She felt gratitude for Ethan, not just for his assistance, but for his patience, kindness, and respect for her choices. As the fire burned low and the room grew warm with the glow of the embers, Ethan suggested he should return home before it got too dark. Clara agreed, though reluctantly, as if she had begun to enjoy his company more than she expected. "Thank you for today," she said softly. It helped more than I thought it would." "I'm glad." "We'll take it one day at a time. There's no rush." The mountains teach patience, and so do people. Walking back through the forest, Ethan felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The day had been more than just about repairing a cabin or delivering supplies. It had been about connection, trust, and the quiet joy of helping someone who truly needed it. He knew that the bond forming between them was fragile and needed care, but it was also real and meaningful. That night, as he lay in his own cabin listening to the wind through the pines, Ethan reflected on the day. He realized that helping Clara had not only improved her life, but had also enriched his own. The mountains had given him solitude for years, but now they were teaching him the value of friendship, compassion, and shared experience. He understood that sometimes the smallest gestures could lead to the most profound changes, and that offering help with patience and respect could create trust that might last a lifetime. Ethan drifted to sleep with a quiet sense of hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, and perhaps new ways to support Clara. But he also knew that the day's events had already marked a turning point, a moment when two people both used to solitude began to discover the power of trust, connection, and human kindness. The days that followed were filled with quiet routines, small acts of kindness, and a slowly growing trust between Ethan and Clara. Every morning, Ethan would rise early, as he always had, but now he looked forward to his walks to Clara's cabin with a sense of purpose beyond his own routine. The mountains remained serene and untouched, but the presence of another person, someone he could share knowledge, work, and conversation with, brought a new warmth to the wilderness. Clara, meanwhile, began to feel a shift within herself. Life in solitude had been her choice, but it had come with loneliness and the constant weight of responsibility.
Now, with Ethan's occasional visits, she began to feel lighter, freer, as if the mountains themselves had become less intimidating.
Rangs. She still valued her independence and had no desire to abandon it, but the knowledge that someone cared, that someone was willing to offer help without expectation, gave her a sense of security she hadn't known in months. One morning, as the sun rose over the peaks, casting pink and orange hues across the landscape, Ethan arrived at Clara's cabin with a small basket of fresh bread he had baked. The smell of warm bread carried through the air, reaching Clara even before she stepped outside. Breath. "Good morning," she said, smiling genuinely. "It smells wonderful. I thought you might enjoy it for breakfast," Ethan replied, handing her the basket. "I also brought a few small things we might need today. Some rope, a hammer, and a few nails. I noticed a loose section on the porch yesterday." Race. "Thank you, Ethan. That will help a lot." She paused, looking at him with quiet curiosity. "I never imagined someone would care enough to notice small things like this." Ethan shrugged lightly. "Sometimes it's the small things that matter most." Breath. "Life is easier when we look out for each other, even in subtle ways." They worked together on the cabin, reinforcing the porch, securing loose boards, and clearing fallen leaves and branches from around the property. The work was simple, yet satisfying. Clara's hands moved skillfully, and Ethan admired her precision and care. Thus, they spoke occasionally, laughing softly at small mistakes or commenting on the beauty of the mountains around them. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and earth, and the soft sound of the stream nearby made the work feel peaceful rather than tiring. As the day wore on, Ethan and Clara took breaks to enjoy tea by the fireplace. During these moments, their conversation became deeper. Clara began to share her story in fragments, speaking of her life before the mountains. A busy city existence, the stress and noise, the feeling of being constantly pulled in different directions. She spoke of the moments that led her to seek solitude, of the need to find herself away from the demands of others. Ethan listened with patience, never interrupting, simply offering a safe space for her to speak. "I sometimes wonder if I made the right choice," Clara admitted softly, staring into the fire. "Being alone can be peaceful, but it can also be lonely. I thought I could handle everything on my own, but I realize now that everyone needs someone at times."
Ethan nodded. "You're not weak for feeling that way," he said.
"It's human. We're capable on our own, yes, but connection, trust, and support, they make life richer, not weaker." Clara smiled, a small warmth spreading through her chest. For the first time in months, she felt understood. It was not just about receiving help, but about having someone acknowledge her choices and her struggles without judgment. She realized that Ethan's presence, his patience, and his kindness were teaching her an important lesson. It was possible to accept help and still be strong, independent, and self-reliant. That afternoon, Ethan suggested they take a walk higher into the mountains, to a ridge he knew offered a clear view of the valley below. Clara agreed, curious to see the view and to spend more time with someone who had become a quiet source of comfort. They walked slowly, carrying a few small tools and a picnic of bread, cheese, and fruit. The trail was challenging, but Ethan guided her carefully, pointing out safe footing and alerting her to low-hanging branches or slippery stones. When they reached the ridge, the sight took Clara's breath away. The mountains stretched endlessly, a sea of green and gold, with streams reflecting the sunlight. like silver threads. The air was crisp, and the silence was profound, broken only by the distant call of birds and the whisper of wind through the trees. Clara stood for a long moment, taking it all in, feeling both small and connected to the vast world around her. Breaths. Ethan watched her quietly. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he said. Briss. Moments like this remind us why we endure the hard work, the isolation, and the struggles. There's a reward in the quiet, if we take the time to notice it.
Clara nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. I never realized.
I didn't know the mountains could feel like this. I thought they were only for survival, for hard work. But there's beauty. And now, a sense of connection, too.
Ethan smiled, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder.
It's more than survival. It's life, fully lived. And it's even better when shared with someone who understands. As they sat together on a flat rock overlooking the valley, sharing the small picnic, Clara felt a shift inside her. The fear of loneliness, the anxiety of facing the mountains alone began to fade. She realized that Ethan's visits, his quiet support, and his respect for her independence had created a safe space for her to open up. She was not dependent on him, but she was learning the value of trust, friendship, and companionship. Over the following weeks, their routine became more natural.
Ethan would visit every few days, bringing supplies, helping with repairs, and occasionally sharing stories or laughter by the fireplace.
Clara began to anticipate his visits with quiet happiness, looking forward to their conversations and the comfort of working side by side.
Their friendship was growing, not rushed, but steady and deepening with each shared moment. One evening, after a long day of repairing the cabin and gathering firewood, they sat together outside, watching the sun set behind the peaks. The sky was painted with shades of orange, pink, and purple, and the mountains seemed to glow in the fading light. Ethan handed Clara a small thermos of tea, and they sat in companionable silence, sipping the warm liquid and listening to the forest around them. "I never thought I'd find someone like this in the mountains," Clara said softly. "Someone who respects my space, my choices, and still cares." Ethan smiled. "Sometimes the right people appear when we least expect them. It doesn't have to be dramatic or sudden. Even quiet gestures, consistent kindness, and shared moments can create a bond that matters." Clara nodded, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. She realized that the mountains, which had once seemed isolating and intimidating, had become a place of growth, trust, and unexpected friendship. She had learned to value her independence while also embracing the warmth of connection. And she knew that Ethan's presence, his gentle support and understanding, had helped her reach this new sense of peace. As night fell, the two returned to the cabin. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting a soft glow on the wooden walls. Clara prepared a simple meal, and they ate together, laughing softly at small jokes and stories. The room was filled with warmth, not just from the fire, but from the sense of companionship they shared. By the end of the evening, Clara realized that she felt stronger and more confident than she had in months. The cabin was secure, the supplies were stocked, and she knew that someone she could trust was nearby. Ethan, in turn, felt a quiet joy and fulfillment. Helping Clara had brought meaning and connection into his own life, reminding him that even in the solitude of the mountains, human bonds could flourish. As they said goodnight, Ethan promised to return soon, but Clara no longer felt nervous or uncertain. Instead, she felt a sense of comfort, knowing that their friendship had grown into something steady, supportive, and meaningful. The mountains were still vast and challenging, but now they also felt like a place where trust, kindness, and growth could coexist with solitude and self-reliance. That night, as Clara lay in her small cabin, she reflected on the changes in her life. She had come to the mountains to find peace and space, but she had found more than that. She had discovered the quiet strength of friendship, the importance of trust, and the simple joy of human connection. The mountains were still her home, but now they were filled with warmth, hope, and the knowledge that she was not entirely alone. Winter was coming to the mountains, and with it came the first real signs of snow. The trees were dusted with white, the streams partially frozen, and the air had a sharp, clean chill that made every breath feel alive. Ethan woke one morning and noticed the quiet beauty of the forest, the way sunlight glimmered on icy branches, and how the world seemed calm, still, and perfect in its own way.
He dressed warmly, grabbed a small basket of supplies, and began the walk to Clara's cabin.
He had come to look forward to these mornings, to share the work, the conversation, and the simple pleasures of life with someone who had become so important to him. When he arrived at the clearing, Clara was outside, her breath visible in the cold air as she stacked firewood near the cabin. She looked up and smiled when she saw him approaching. "Good morning, Ethan," she said warmly. "I wasn't expecting you this early." "I thought it would be helpful," Ethan replied with a grin. "The snow might make walking harder tomorrow, and I wanted to make sure you're prepared." He set down the basket, which was filled with blankets, extra food, and a few warm tools for her small stove. Clara's eyes softened as she accepted the items. "Britt, you've been such a help these past weeks," she said quietly. "I can't thank you enough. I feel safer now, knowing someone cares. You've worked hard to survive here, Clara. You're strong and capable. I'm just glad I can support you in small ways. That's all." The two of them spent the morning tidying the cabin and surrounding area. They cleared fallen branches, secured the roof against heavy snow, and stocked up on firewood. The work was quiet, steady, and comforting. Each task accomplished was a reminder of how much they had grown, both individually and together. Where once Clara had worried about handling everything on her own, she now felt confident that challenges could be met with patience, preparation, and, if needed, a trusted friend. After the work was done, Ethan suggested a short walk through the snow-dusted forest. The ground crunched under their boots as they moved along the familiar trail. Clara marveled at the transformation of the mountains under a blanket of white, the way the sunlight reflected off the frost, and the stillness that made every sound more vivid. Respect. They paused at a small clearing where the frozen streams sparkled like crystals. "It's amazing how the mountains change," Clara said softly. "Brants, I never realized how much life and beauty there could be here in winter. I was so focused on surviving before I didn't notice the world around me." Ethan smiled. "Brask in the mountains. It teaches you to survive, yes. But it also teaches you to observe, appreciate, and grow. The beauty is always there. You just have to take the time to see it." Clara nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "I feel like I've grown a lot these past months. Not just because of the mountains, but because of you. Your visits, your kindness, your patience. It's changed how I see myself and my surroundings." Ethan's face softened. Inspiration. "I'm glad. And I've learned a lot, too." Sometimes helping someone else helps you understand yourself better. They returned to the cabin and shared a quiet meal of warm stew and bread. As they ate, they spoke of small plans for the coming weeks, stocking more firewood, checking on the roof again, and preparing for the long nights ahead. There was no rush, no pressure, just the calm rhythm of two people working and living together in harmony with the mountains. After dinner, they sat by the fireplace, the warm glow reflecting on the wooden walls. The cabin felt cozy, secure, and alive with the energy of shared effort and companionship. Clara looked around, noticing the improvements they had made together. The repaired porch, the strengthened roof, the neatly stacked woodpile, and the small touches of warmth and comfort. She realized that Ethan's presence had not only made her cabin safer, but it also made her life richer. She felt seen, supported, and understood in a way she hadn't thought possible. I never imagined someone could care so much without asking for anything in return, Clara said softly. I used to think kindness always came with a price, but you've shown me it doesn't have to be that way.
Ethan shook his head.
Bration. Kindness doesn't need a reason. Sometimes it's just about seeing someone's need and responding. It's about being human, caring for one another, and making the world a little better where you can. Clara smiled, feeling a warmth beyond the fire breath.
You've made a difference in my life, Ethan. Not just with supplies or repairs, but with your presence.
B. You've helped me feel connected again. Ethan's smile reflected a quiet joy. And you've made a difference in mine, Clara. Being here, helping you, seeing your resilience and courage, it's reminded me what truly matters. Life isn't just about surviving. It's about connection, trust, and shared experiences, even in the quietest places. Winter arrived fully, and the mountains transformed into a pristine wonderland. Snow blanketed the trees, streams froze into delicate patterns, and the nights grew long and silent. Ethan and Clara continued their routine, checking the cabin, gathering firewood, and sharing meals. The bond between them grew stronger, built on trust, respect, and consistent support. Neither of them rushed the relationship, understanding that meaningful connections develop slowly, over time, through patience and care. One evening after a particularly heavy snowfall, Ethan and Clara sat outside on a fallen log, wrapped in blankets, watching the moonlight reflect off the snow. The world was still, quiet, and breathtakingly beautiful. Clara broke the silence, her voice soft but firm. Burse. I don't feel alone anymore. Not because I have you helping me, but because I feel seen, respected, and understood. Branth. That's something I've never felt before. Ethan nodded, understanding fully. And that's the essence of connection. You don't need to give up independence to experience it. You just need trust, patience, and a willingness to accept care when it's offered.
Clara looked at him thoughtfully.
I think I've learned the most important lesson in life here. Solitude is valuable, but human connection, trust, kindness, support is irreplaceable.
It's what makes life meaningful, Ethan smiled.
Exactly. And sometimes the most unexpected places and people can teach us that lesson.
The mountains brought us together, but it's our choices and actions that turned a simple friendship into something lasting.
As the weeks passed, Clara became more confident in managing her life in the cabin.
She learned new skills from Ethan, and he learned from her as well. Together they repaired fences, tended small gardens, and even prepared food to store for the months ahead. The work was satisfying, the conversation meaningful, and the quiet companionship profound. They had discovered a balance, independence paired with trust, solitude paired with connection. By spring, the snow had melted, the streams flowed freely, and the mountains were alive with new growth. Ethan and Clara stood together on the ridge where they had shared a picnic months earlier, looking out over the valley below. The world was renewed, and so were they. The mountains, which had once symbolized isolation and challenge, now represented growth, trust, and lasting friendship. Clara turned to Ethan, a soft smile on her face.
I can't imagine this life without your support, not because I need you to survive, but because you've made life richer, brighter, and more meaningful.
Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling the warmth and strength in her words. And you've made my life better, too. Patience. You've shown me the power of trust, patience, and genuine human connection. That's a gift I will always treasure. As they descended the ridge together, returning to the cabin, the mountains seemed to hum with life. The forest, the The streams and the open sky reflected the harmony that had grown between two people who had once been alone. They had learned that kindness, patience, and support could transform lives quietly, profoundly, and permanently. That evening, as the sun set and the cabin glowed warmly against the evening sky, Clara and Ethan shared a simple meal and sat together in companionable silence. Outside, the mountains stretched endlessly, beautiful and untamed. Inside, the cabin was filled with trust, understanding, and the quiet joy of a bond that had grown stronger with each passing day. Clara realized that her life in the mountains had changed in ways she could never have anticipated. She had found safety, friendship, and connection without losing the independence she valued so deeply. And Ethan understood that sometimes the most meaningful experiences in life come not from grand gestures, but from consistent quiet acts of kindness, understanding, and patience. As night fell and the stars appeared, both of them knew that this bond, born in the mountains, nurtured through patience and care, would last a lifetime. They had discovered a truth that few ever experience fully, that life, even in solitude, is richer when shared with someone who cares, and that true friendship can flourish in the quietest and most unexpected places. The mountains had been their home, but it was the connection they built together that had truly transformed their lives. And in that they found not only friendship, but hope, peace, and the simple joy of knowing they would never be alone again.